On Saturday, the remains of Bishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu will be interred at the Cathedral in Cape Town. Before then, a requiem mass will take place to bid him farewell. As most Anglicans know, a requiem mass is a significant event. Let's now hear from Reverend Xolani Dlwathi, the Anglican Dean of Johannesburg, about this important church tradition. Reverend, thank you so much for your time. And I suppose this part of the interview is where we can get a lot of our SABC viewers more familiar with some of the practices within the Anglican Church. Perhaps you can talk to us about what a requiem mass is.
Thank you very much, Anastasia. A requiem mass forms part of what we call the Eucharist service within the Anglican Church. A requiem is when it's a funeral, it's always called a requiem mass. But the emphasis of that, it's actually the word Eucharist, which means, in essence, the word Eucharist comes from the Greek word, which means I thank you, or giving thanks, which means it recognizes the gifts that one has received from God. It recognizes the nature of God in our lives and the nature God continues to play. And therefore, it puts in its center the emphasis of recognizing that what we have comes from God, and those we have are a gift to us from God. So you know that in the Anglican Church most of the time, because we are also called the Eucharistic Church. So whenever we have a requiem mass, whenever we have a Eucharist, the emphasis is to give thanks to God for the life of the one whom we have gathered about. But secondly, it moves the emphasis from the one who has passed on to God, so that we may understand it all begins and it all ends with God. So God remains the central part of a requiem mass. And that is why we holistically give thanks to God for the one who has passed on, but also for all the other gifts that God has actually given us. And therefore you would know that in the Anglican tradition, of course, it also emphasizes for us the grace we've received from God, celebrating the gift we've received from God, which is the major gift is Christ himself. Symbolically, whom we receive through his body and blood for nourishment, for strength, and to be enabled to continue God's mission and ministry.
Right. We learned earlier as well that the arch will be interred at the cathedral. And I suppose many of our viewers are asking why that is the case. Well,
firstly, it is because that's how he has requested it to be done. He has also requested that he needs to be cremated rather than buried. But it is an old church tradition. It is an old Anglo-Catholic tradition, in fact, from 2,000 years ago, that those who have served, particularly in the episcopal ministry of the church, and that is why if you travel the world, you would see in most of the cathedrals, you would see symbolism of those who are buried in the cathedral. So it is a significant Anglican church tradition that people like Desmond Tutu, who have committed their life to the church, who have committed their lives to God, who have faithfully served God, that would prefer that their ashes are interred inside the church. For bishops, mostly, if you go throughout the world, especially in London and the other parts of the world, they are normally actually interred under the altar itself, under the sanctuary itself, but also some other parts within the cathedral will be used. But this one, I think, because of his stature, of his nature, I think he will be interred right at the sanctuary. But to inter ashes is not only a bishop's matter. We do it in the Anglican Church for all other people, but normally there would be sacred spaces created, which we call remembrance gardens within some of our churches, which will be called off, and those who have been cremated, their ashes will be interred within those spaces within our churches. Sometimes they are sprinkled, sometimes they are put on the ground, and memorial plaques are put there. So it is a normal tradition within the church, which dates years back, over 2,000 years ago. Yes.
Does it make a difference that one would want to be cremated, or is it just a preference?
That's a very interesting question. Firstly, I think it is a personal preference. Holistically, people who would be buried for normal reasons, because at the time, especially within our communities, that's all we knew, how we dispose of those who have passed on. But in many parts of the world and other parts of our communities, it is a norm for some people to prefer to be cremated for various reasons. And that too is actually correct. So it is a personal preference how people want, either to be buried, to actually be cremated. But of course, your question may be linked with the undertones of whether, how does that look spiritually? Is it acceptable? Indeed, it is actually acceptable. Because remember, when we live, we must not put emphasis too much on the body. When we talk about the life in a person, we are not talking about the physical body. We talk about the Spirit of God that lives inside that particular person. And when we say rest in peace, we talk about the soul that would have left the body. So how we dispose of the body when one has passed on, though it has very traditional significance in many other people, but it's still okay to be cremated as well. And I'm glad that this is becoming a norm within our society, particularly in times now where we have no space to create burial sites. Municipalities are struggling. So being cremated should be an option that many of us consider as well.
So a little bit earlier on, and in fact, yesterday, we had the ringing of the bells at St. George's Cathedral. Is this something that happens for individuals of such a high stature within the Anglican Church?
In fact, in terms of the Anglican tradition, particularly in areas where they still keep the Anglo-Catholicism, the bells were also used as a means of notifying people when somebody had passed on, particularly in rural areas. When I served as the priest in Kagiso, I remember whenever we received a message that somebody had done, I would go as the priest and begin to ring the bell, which will tell the community by implication that one of us has left us or was left among us. So the ringing of the bells, therefore, was not only done for specific or some people, it is a general norm in the Church of God. In this case, the Archbishop has asked that it's done, as you see it done at the Cathedral and other cathedrals, at 12 midday every day, simply to honor, to celebrate a life of a man of Archbishop Desmond Tutu's stature. And therefore, that's why during this week, there's a specific, actually, attention giving into that particular practice. But it is a norm in the Anglican Church. Even when the body leaves the church, once the requiem mass is done, the bells will actually be rung at the same time. So it is a normal practice within the Anglo-Catholic Church, yes.
On that note, what other church traditions should we look forward to on Saturday?
Of course, when a bishop has passed on or a priest has passed on, there are particular traditions that actually follow. One, you would see, depending how the plans are, how the body is moved into the church, and one of the other traditions, people will normally accompany the body with one with his mitre, one holding his cope, or his priestly elements that he was using, and sometimes those are placed on top of the coffin themselves during the service. But normally, when you are a priest as well in the church, when you are vested in your normal Sunday Eucharistic vestments, even when you are buried, including the chasuble, to signify that you are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. And therefore, that is normally practiced as well. But the other tradition that is actually practiced, you will see when his coffin is put in church, it will not be standing like many of the lay people. Under lay people, their feet will be in the sanctuary and their head will be on the people. But when it's a priest or when it's a bishop in the Church of God, the coffin is put upside down, which means his head will be at the sanctuary and his feet will be on the people. In other traditions, if it's a bishop, of course, if the space allows, the coffin is actually put inside the sanctuary and not where we normally put the other coffins of most lay people. And that signifies that you are a priest forever. It also signifies your role as a priest that you were there to lead the people of God, share with them in the sacraments of God, share with them in the Holy Eucharist, and lead them in prayer. And therefore, even if you've passed, we still elevate that aspect of you as a priest in the Church of God. As I said, remember, it's only the body that is actually dead, but the spirit and the life in that person continues to actually live. So those are some of the fascinating traditions. If we were going to bury him at this time, because we're not burying him because he will be interred, in the graveyard you will see the graveyard of priests follow the same tradition. They are put upside down, which means where the head of other people who are buried are, the priest's head will be on the feet of other people to signify that role that you played as part of the celebration of leading the people of God in worship and in service. So those are some of the very exciting, practices that we do, but that are symbolic. But the emphasis that we must never lose is that God remains the center. And all these practices and traditions are trying to bring us closer to God and point us to God. So those would be some of the fascinating things you would see.
Thank you so much for your time. That has been absolutely informative and educational, not just for me, but for many of our SABC viewers. That is Reverend Xolani Dlwathi of the Anglican Dean of Johannesburg, talking to us about some of the important traditions that we will witness on Saturday.